Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today, Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing well, and we have a very special program today.
Yes, we do.
It's a little bit different in the studio, and that's a little bit unusual, too. But we have an individual that got involved in a political campaign. I think it was a campaign back in 2007, and somebody was running for president. But he sort of got enthusiastic and participated a lot at the grassroots. His name is Joby Weeks, and he's with us today. And he observed the campaign from a different position than you in the congressional office and me out there, fighting with the media, and he was working with the grassroots. Joby, welcome to the program today.
Thanks, Rod. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, good. So we want to talk a little bit about you remembering, the campaign, because when we've talked, you've been a little bit excited about it and thought it was a great time. Tell me the difference about where you were, maybe philosophically and excitement about the freedom movement versus after 2007, after our campaign got going, because there was a change. It even amazed me because I didn't expect much to happen, but evidently you and others sort of decided otherwise.
Well, we're trying to continue the revolution as well, so it hasn't died. We've, back in the day, 2007, 11 years ago now, I got so excited to learn that you were running for office because I was already into the whole Creature from Jekyll Island. Ed Griffin's book got me really into kind of how the Federal Reserve was started, and we were already in the wellness industry, and you had the Health Freedom Protection Act. And so I knew about you. I had read your books, The Foreign Policy of Freedom and Pillars of Prosperity, your End of Fed book, and Liberty Defined, and I just loved you. And then you decided to run for president, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's running for president. This is like a dream come true. And so, we did a lot for you out in Colorado. We put together the Ron Paul blimp and the Ron Paul limo and the Ron Paul Air Force. We minted you Ron Paul coins, and it was just grassroots, zip tying your signs to all the traffic exits of all the highways. We would get groups of friends together, and we called it Paint the Town Ron, and anything we could do with the little money we had to get the message of liberty and freedom out.
I'll tell you. You evidently followed my admonition, because I always said, this is serious, and I would be serious, and yet I said, one thing is you can't get overly serious, and if I was talking to a large group of college kids and they were getting enthusiastic, but you have to have fun doing it. Yeah. Evidently you were able to interject the fun, because a lot of people still remember the blimp. Not as many people about the limousine, but the limousine was a big deal too.
Yeah. Well, the blimp was expensive. It cost about $14,000 a day to keep it in the air. It was in the air for about 40 days or so. We spent around $800,000 doing it, which sailed from Florida all the way up to Washington, D.C. We were trying to get it to go to New Hampshire for the primaries, but it was all, January, it's wintertime, it's snowing, it's sleeting, it's dark out, it's windy, so it was hard to fly the blimp because the FAA has all these regulations, whereas when I rented the limo, the world's longest stretch limo, and I wrapped it in an American flag and put freedom and liberty and sound money and private property and bring our troops home, all that kind of stuff. The limo I could drive at night, during the day, during snowstorms, and so Stephanie and I took the limo to 30 states, and that got a lot of attention as well. So the blimp a lot of people saw from the sky, and the limo people saw from the ground, Yeah.
Well, you sent me your bio. Your bio is very impressive, and we're not going to read it. No. So look at how much you've done a lot, and I think there's a couple things in the bio that impressed me. One is you've been very successful in business, and that's to be complimented. But the other thing is your travel experience, because you've been to 150 countries. I've been to a couple, and because when I was in the military and elsewhere, but you have been traveling. I don't know how you get enough time to go to 150 countries. You ought to be, and I think Daniel's waiting to talk to you because he's the foreign policy expert, but you've had some on-ground experience overseas. But how did all this traveling get in? How'd you get involved in so much?
Well, I read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
I know.
And Robert Kiyosaki's book really changed my life, and I went on to read the book Retire Young, Retire Rich, and the Cash Flow Quadrant and Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. And so I figured if I wanted to retire young and retire rich, I should just follow the the book. And so I did. And then I made all this money. But the idea was passive residual income. And so when you set up a business that's generating passive income, then you don't have to work for money anymore. You have money work for you. And so that's what I did. And so that gave me the freedom to then be able to travel. And the idea is to go everywhere and do everything. And so we've sailed 95% of the world now. And like we were discussing earlier about Eastern Europe, we did a drive through Albania and Macedonia and Greece and Kosovo and the whole Eastern Bloc, Serbia and Croatia. We started a liberty-minded country called Liberland with VIT, which we gave you a passport a little while ago. So the land of liberty, or Liberland, and up through Prague and Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and all these great countries, and the young people, and they're all about, they know what socialism was. They remember the Cold War and communism, and they just love capitalism. They love freedom. You can feel the energy of people now in these countries. I'm telling you what, it's an exciting, and then you come to America and everybody's like, Bernie Sanders socialism. And I'm like, wait, these people just got out of it and they're so excited and happy, and like here we are, we're about to fall into it. And so that's why I'm so passionate about making sure people know that I come across that if they're getting hoodwinked and fooled into this collectivist ideology, that I kind of share with them, kind of boots on the ground type things too. And really, last week we were up in the Arctic Circle trying to do the Northwest Passage, and a lot of people are buying into this whole man-made global warming thing, and they said that the ice was going to be gone in 2009, and then they changed it to ice is going to be gone in 2013, and then they said all the ice is going to be gone in 2015. I was just there on the ground. There's more ice than ever. We got stopped. We couldn't make it through the Northwest Passage at all. Too much ice. So a lot of stuff that we're told isn't necessarily true.
That's right. Daniel.
It's interesting that you've traveled so much, because I think this is part of the problem with our anti-war message. A lot of Americans, particularly I think a lot of the hawkish Americans, they don't get overseas. They don't get to visit with people. So it's an abstract idea. Hey, we're going to force our democracy on them. We're going to force them to do what we want. And never really connecting that these are actually people. And you, by traveling to so many countries, you have that sense. You have the sense these are really people with same kinds of struggles that we have. And I was just wondering if you think this is sort of accurate, the idea that people that you've met, that you come across, average people, they like Americans, but they just don't like the idea of the American government telling them what to do.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. I've never had any issues anywhere with people anywhere around the world. Just everybody's cool. You sit down, you have a drink with them at the bar and go whatever and do whatever and see their countries, and they're very open and gracious. And it's really just the leaders at the top that want to put the soldiers and all their people to fight each other, but the people themselves have no problems. I mean, that's what I thought was interesting. And yes, a lot of people that traveling say, well, why can't you guys go back and tell your leaders to stop bombing us over here, when you're going through the Middle East. We went through Syria, we went through Jordan, we went through Turkey, we went through Egypt, Tunisia and Morocco and all these countries in the Middle East, Israel and Lebanon. And these people are like, look, it's in Syria, for instance, it wasn't even they're rebels. It's rebels coming from outside of Syria trying to overthrow Assad. It's Gaddafi getting overthrown and all those weapons that the Clintons smuggled in to ISIS, to create ISIS with Obama. I always call him, instead of Barack Obama, is Obama. So unfortunately, a lot of people there know more about our foreign policy than Americans know about our own foreign policy. And all the Americans really know is what CNN tells them. So you can tell that when there's all this fake news.
And I know you've been interested in the monetary issue, and I really got involved in politics over the monetary issue. What was happening in the 1970s, the breakdown of Bretton Woods and the explosion of fiat currencies and this sort of thing. But there is a connection. As time went on, I saw a precise connection between monetary policy, the growth of the welfare state, but also the growth of the military state too, because none of that can be financed, without the inflation of the currency, and because taxpayers can't afford it. Physically, they can't, and they would finally resist. But and I'm sure you've thought about this because you make plans, but there has to be a limit to this, because what we've been living on, from my estimation, is we've been living on debt facilitated by the Federal Reserve and a trust in a currency that we shouldn't be trusting.
Yeah, I agree. And that's been my main passion, because that's the root cause of everything else that happens. And a lot of people, they like to focus on the symptoms, but then more and more symptoms happen, and I think it's so much smarter. When you have the ability to create all this money out of nothing, then you can finance the welfare warfare state. And then, so you basically have these two parties, right? I say the Demopublicans and the Republicrats, right? Because they're two different wings of the same bird of prey. They have no problem with sticking a gun to your head and stealing your money and robbing you. It's just, what do we spend the stolen loot on? And so, yeah, when you look at the root cause in the Federal Reserve, and if we would go back to sound money, that's why I like Bitcoin, because the Federal Reserve can't create Bitcoin out of nothing. That's why I like gold and silver. They can't just print gold and silver out of nothing. And so, yeah, if we vote with our wallets and we stop using their money, that's why I liked your Free Competition and Currency Act that you introduced in Congress. If people just voted with their wallets, stop doing business with the companies that are exploiting people, and stop doing business with, stop using their money and use a different currency that doesn't finance the welfare state. I know that there was a push for the Bitcoins Not Bombs campaign, where people were like, look, Bitcoin doesn't finance Lockheed Martin and Boeing, missiles and drones and all these types of things. But when you use the dollars, they do. But they try to say, oh, well, the drug dealers use Bitcoin, or the terrorists use Bitcoin. No, they don't. We're flying airplane loads full of pallets, $100 bills, paying out $2.3 trillion went missing from the Pentagon. U.S. dollars are what's financing the military-industrial complex. It's not Bitcoin. Yeah. It's not Bitcoin that the underworld and the child traffickers and this whole deep state is using. It's the Federal Reserve notes that's doing it.
Yeah, Daniel.
It was really funny at the time, Joby. We were in Dr. Paul's office, in his congressional office, and it was a very different feel. It was almost, I wouldn't say we felt jealous, but it felt like he had a new mistress, when he sort of left us for this exciting world of the things that you were doing, the grassroots things that you were doing. And it was amazing to watch, because he was our congressman doing speeches and making the arguments, and all of a sudden he became such a worldwide figure. And you were part of that excitement that we felt too, vicariously, and it was it was very motivating to us. But I was wondering, actually, a two-part question: how did being part of that change you 10 years on?
Sure.
And the second part, what would you say to those that feel maybe a little disillusioned now? The excitement of the campaign is gone. We're still doing what we do. We're still pushing Dr. Paul's ideas of freedom and liberty, but maybe they feel a little bit dispirited because of that excitement not being there.
Well, I tell you what, it was the most exciting time of my life. I mean, you became a rock star. I mean, you threw the Rally for the Republic right next to the Republican National Convention, and your convention was twice as big. And I was there. I was a national delegate, right? So I could have either gone to the National Convention or the Ron Paul Convention. And I was like, I'm going to the Ron Paul one, because they stole the election from you. Just like the Clintons stole it from Bernie Sanders. I mean, the Republicrats are no better than the Demopublicans in terms of just underhanded, corrupt stuff. And so when I started out, I grew up in a family, a blue blood Bostonian family, East Coast. My great grandfather was Secretary of War under Harding and Coolidge. He was on a monetary commission that signed the Federal Reserve Act. He was a senator. His fund started Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all this, Hornblower and Weeks, and his son was Secretary of Commerce under Eisenhower. So I grew up with the kind of Ivy League type thing. And then I started reading, in 8th grade, I read Atlas Shrugged. And I was like, oh, Ayn Rand. And then I read The Fountainhead and, We the Living and Anthem and all these books. And I went into the entrepreneurship because I figured we could help people become entrepreneurs. And as entrepreneurs, they automatically become libertarians, because once you're starting to work in building a business, you don't want half your property stolen from you after you. It takes away the incentive to create and produce if you know that half your stuff is going to be stolen from you. And so I just fell into becoming a libertarian, and I became a registrar with all my friends. And unfortunately, I lived in a Democrat neighborhood where no one was Republican. And for me to become a committee chairperson to vote for you at the convention, I had to go door to door and get all my Democrat friends, neighbors, to become Republicans so they could vote for me. So I became the committee chairperson, and I learned how the precincts work, so I became a district captain, and then I went to the county convention, got elected to that one, and then I got elected to the Congressional Assembly, and then I learned how to figured out how to get elected to the state convention, and then we made it to the national convention. And so only two of us, unfortunately, that were supporting you made it to the national convention from Colorado, me and my buddy Sean. But how did it change me? Well, it helped me learn and understand how our democratic republic works. Not a lot of people are taught these types of things, and I think that that's on purpose. You know, we're not taught how to be entrepreneurs in school. We're taught how to follow rules and fill out forms and respect the guy that's got the the uniform on, and so we get out after 12 years of indoctrination and propaganda and stuff, and it's no wonder that a lot of people don't even know how the system works.
Right. Most of the time people think of the domestic policy, economics, and welfareism, and then the warfareism. But there was another subject, which is a third part of the freedom message, and it has to do with civil liberties, personal liberties. I found in those campaigns that with the young people especially, much more so than the Chamber of Commerce crowd, they were really excited, because I can remember spontaneously hearing about NDAA, arrests without recourse, and that galvanized them. And I can remember one time I was just sort of flipping it out in my speech, and I said, we ought to have the right to drink raw milk, and I thought, well, who would care about that esoteric subject? And I thought, and I got applause for that. There were people who understood. They might not even been drinking raw milk or want to, but they understood the message. And a lot of people say, well, what's the matter with you libertarians? All you want to do are legalize drugs. I said, I don't want to have anything to do with legalizing drugs. We want to legalize freedom.
A victim. If there's no victim, there's no crime, in my philosophy, and that's why the movement is continuing, but they always say, what's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist? It's about 6 months of reading. I mean, you read the Murray Rothbard and Hayek and all these Austrian economists, and then you start listening to Jeff Berwick, his Anarchast radio show, which if you're ever on a podcast, Jeff Berwick's Anarchast is great. In fact, Anarcho-Poco, where you're going to be speaking at this coming year in Mexico, this February, Anarcho-Poco, if you guys can come down, it's the biggest libertarian, anarcho-capitalist freedom movement, the voluntarists, where I believe all human interaction should be voluntary. And so as long as you're not using force, fraud, or coercion to get your way, you should be able to do whatever it is you want. But if you are, if it's not voluntary and you have to get your way by a barrel of a gun, then you're violating people's rights and it's illegitimate. And so that's what I say is, as long as it's voluntary, I'm for it. So that's how you beat any political conversation anybody brings up at the dinner table over Christmas or whatever. When they're talking politics, you say, well, if it's voluntary, I'm for it. You want to be socialist? Great. If it's voluntary, go for it. But don't force me to do something
that's way too simple. That can't solve the problem.
Well, but you think about it. You get them to say, well, but it's not voluntary, is it? Because your philosophy requires violence.
That's right.
Your philosophy, and then you kind of just say, well, my philosophy is voluntary, and I'm not using force, fraud, or coercion to get my way. Yours does, so my philosophy is morally superior to yours, and then I just basically call them evil, and hopefully they'll change their ways, because it's illegitimate to use violence to get your way, and that's what all these statist philosophies of collectivism, that's all it is. It's just force and violence.
And Daniel, we're getting ready to close, but do you have another question for him or a comment?
Yeah, I would just ask, because we get this question, you get this question a lot more than I do, but what advice would you give young people who are interested in this movement, they want to do something based on what you've done and you've learned, what would you tell them?
I would say read all of Ron Paul's books. I mean, his books are the best. The Foreign Policy of Freedom is excellent. The Pillars of Prosperity, excellent. Read the Robert Kiyosaki books and The Creature from Jekyll Island, and follow Doug Casey and Peter Schiff, and learn about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and get involved in the local level. I would say that, plus follow me on Facebook, friend me up at Joby Weeks on Facebook, or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat, or Joby Weeks everywhere is how you reach me. My main business now is helping entrepreneurs become millionaires. I've helped 100 people already make over $1 million a year. My goal is to help 1,000 people make $1 million a year. And so we're doing that, mining Bitcoin and doing all types of cool stuff. Come to Anarcho-Poco and get involved in the local level. The local level is where you can make changes. In Colorado, we recently made changes to legalize cannabis. Well, it wasn't recent, but right after your campaign. we did that, and so that's spreading across the world, and now the hemp movement is happening, and CBD, and people are realizing they can grow their own medicine and all that type of stuff. So just get involved any way you can. There's meetup groups all over the country that are doing these things, and come to the conferences and keep in touch.
Well, that's perfect, because you started off with a thing that I think we should start off with, and that is, you mentioned education. Read, study, study, study. And I learned that very early on from Leonard Reed, from the Foundation of Economic Education. He says, know the issues, study them, and people will make use of your talent if you're believable. Yeah. He says somebody will come to you and use you, or you will be able to use this. And obviously, what you knew about and your enthusiasm, all of a sudden you were used in a campaign. But I kid a little bit when they say, what should I do, what should I do? I said, whatever you want to do,
yeah.
Because it's laissez-faire, and everybody has a different idea. Write a book or get involved, be a teacher, even run for an office, But don't. I always tell them, young people always say, well, I want to be a congressman. What do you do to become a congressman? I want to be like you. I said, don't run for Congress, because I think some people are doing that for the wrong reason. They want to be a congressman. That was probably the furthest removed from anything I wanted to do, was to be in office, to be something. But I used it, obviously, for a purpose.
Well, it's a great libertarian conspiracy to run and get power so we can leave everybody alone. I mean, the person that wants to be president is not the person you want to vote for. That's why we supported you, because you didn't want to be president. And we're like, that's the perfect guy to be president. And that's why a lot of these cities and towns around the country are actually voting in pets. There's a cat that's mayor in Wasilla, because the people don't want anything to change. They like their freedom, and they know that if you give government all this power, next thing you know, so they just put a cat in office or a dog as mayor, and so then nothing changes, So.
Well, let me close by how I used to summarize my speech. I want to be president for the things I don't want to do. I don't want to run your life.
Yep.
I don't run the economy because I don't know how to run the economy, and I don't want to run foreign governments because I have no moral right or constitutional right to do so. We ought to just mind our own business. Amen. That is the road to peace and prosperity. Joby, great to have you here.
Thanks
it was delightful. We really enjoyed it.
And thank you.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.